Please hold whilst we connect you to Redacted.
Hi, this is Oliver Alexander.
And this is Fraser Greenfield.
And I'm Stefan Ytterborn. You're listening to Redacted.
Today we are joined by Stefan Ytterborn. Founder and CEO of POC, and most famously, Cake, the electric bicycle and motorbike company that shook the foundations of the automotive and design worlds. Based in Stockholm, Sweden, Stefan has been one of the minds that put IKEA into nearly every modern home. More recently, Stefan and several of his colleagues have founded their own design agency, COM-TRU, with the intent of executing top-tier aspirational design. To the people who don't know who you are, Stefan, who is Stefan Ytterborn in 100 words or less?
All right. I guess that I'm someone committed to purpose. I've been working throughout my career with consumer-oriented initiatives, products, services, and whatnot, and an entrepreneur starting my own businesses. And I've been through 7 to 10 businesses at this point. And I'd say that the common denominator beyond purpose is that I early on found a structure starting businesses to embrace my drive and my ambitions in terms of what I have initiated and what I've been operationally running throughout the years.
A lot of these businesses are well known for, in the design world, for a strong aesthetic relationship as well as quality. Would you say that's been your key marker, or is there something else strategic and the good design is just an outcome?
I started out in the furniture field back when I was in my early 20s, and I think that actually came from something else. I was heavily interested in architecture over time, and I did not start my journey within the contemporary space. It was more like the 15 and 1600s and trying to understand how architecture and style, and not at least consumer preferences, changed over time. And then by pretty much 1985, I ended up realizing this is where I should be. This is what interests me, how things come about, how society changes perspectives and aspirations. And on the furniture side of things, that was a brilliant training camp for getting into aspects of making manufacturing, material, industrial, commercialization aspect of things, and not at least the level of tactile or elaborated initiatives. So that pretty much has guided my way forward, no matter which business or industry or space I've been in.
Could you roll us back a bit? What was this first entry point into the furniture industry that you had?
Again, I was on this historic journey that really got me excited, and realizing that it was now and the contemporary stuff that did attract me or interest me the most. I went down to Milan. I was barely 20 years old. I think it was in my late teens pretty much. And I basically lied about the fact that, or I was the companies that interested me with different pieces of furniture and whatever it was. I was backed by a big company in Sweden, and I was looking out to represent different companies in Scandinavia and managed to get a few of those with me. I pretty much started my own first business by importing contemporary furniture to Sweden. That's how it got started.
And you didn't study anything to do this? You just started?
Pure passion. I guess that's another aspect of me, speaking about who I am. I've got itchy feet. The school thing, academically, I was never patient enough to pursue that. So I went right into what got me going. And at the time, it was all about contemporary furniture and lighting.
Okay, so you started a few businesses of your own, and then, as I understand it, you eventually got headhunted by IKEA. Is that correct?
What happened was that in the mid-'80s, I'd say that the era at that time was very much a highly elaborated, luxurious perspective on design, and the borderline between art and design was not that. It was a hazy line between those two aspects or phenomena. I was in that, and a few interesting things happened. Spain, the post-Franco Spain kind of era came along, where Spain suddenly started establishing themselves as a meaningful kind of region or geography or culture for innovative design, changing perspectives and ideas. But there was a major situation where the financial climate went down, or it was financial crisis, early 90s, and that was pretty much what truly opened up for the opportunity when it comes to Swedish design. Aspects of durability and simplicity and sobriety and stuff like that was suddenly promoted and aspired for within the market. And those are traditional Scandinavian design values. So I pretty much changed from importing contemporary international design to Sweden to looking into the opportunity of actually bringing contemporary Swedish design again, because it had been pretty dead for the past 35 years, back on the international stage again. So that was the opportunity that occurred, and that was very much, due to what was happening in society, and not at least when it comes to the financial crisis. And so I brought together with me a number of designers. I started my own furniture brand at that time named CBI. Went to Milan, being the only Swedish exhibitor at the furniture show in 1993. But it was a small company. I didn't have any resources or funding or anything. So I'm honestly just looking back at it. How did I actually make that happen? But you're young and you're full of energy, and you got tons of helpful friends. Anyhow, that I came to the conclusion that if I am to optimize the opportunity, the window that had opened in time to reestablish a position for Swedish design internationally, I had to pull a few more strings. So in that sense, IKEA, something that I, for various reasons, did not appreciate that much. One thing being a copycat selling crappy stuff to a large extent. But with the forces now trying to infuse contemporary relevant design into IKEA, I approached them and I got this assignment. So that was a consultancy job for a number of years, and I was directing and developed a product named IKEA PS. And that brought together, say, 15 or 17 contemporary Swedish designers, young dudes, and that was launched later on in 1995 at the furniture show with huge impact. So that was pretty much how one thing led to the other, and IKEA was mainly to enforce or empower the impact of that something was actually going on in Sweden. And it was really successful from a number of different perspectives, but we might get into it. We'll see how this discussion, where it leads us.
It sounds like you had that underlying purpose from quite early on. Like growing up, you felt like you wanted to make an impact in Swedish design.
Yeah, that was at the time. That was, and I think that there was also a strong reason for it, because again, Sweden had been hidden for a long time when it comes to being relevant in terms of what was going on in design. And for myself to become a knowledgeable, credible someone in this space, without being too smart about how long-term I was in that sense, but I felt that I needed a solid platform, and being Swedish in that sense needed a Swedish kind of position and credibility on an international scale. So I invested pretty much in a number of different things, not at least not being considered being from outer space, but being someone where things happened that had relevancy to what was going on. So
just to anchor this in time, this is like early 90s, just after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1992.
I launched CBI in Milan in 1993. We launched the IKEA project in 1995. So very much evolving from the early 90s and what was going on. And then it takes a while to develop stuff and make stuff. So
because we don't necessarily understand IKEA as a copycat furniture brand at the moment, but there's definitely similar businesses like that now.
Yeah.
How did you go about approaching IKEA and pitching this to them?
So there was this guy, Lennart Ekmark, who was a established senior guy within IKEA. He'd been working very close to the founder, Ingvar Kamprad. And he was a radical in IKEA. He brought forward ideas that no one else really supported. I'd say he was a bit of a punk rocker in that sense. And I didn't know him at the time, but I read an article about him and realized that if I'm going to utilize the IKEA opportunity, he's the guy that I need to convince. And so I just called him. He knew a bit who I was, because again, just prior to starting this Swedish venture, I'd been working with international designers, of course, and I brought them to Sweden for shows and whatnot. So again, looking at Australia, for instance, Mark Newson became an important and early friend, and someone that I did represent in terms of furniture, together with the Jasper Morrisons and Konstantin Gricics and James Irvines and so forth of the world. So in that sense, he knew who I was, because I had established some kind of a recognition in Sweden, at least when it comes to bringing contemporary design to Sweden. So when I called him, he was like, yes, let's do a chat. And I went down to IKEA and I pointed at the various reasons why Swedish design was booming due to, again, changing values within the society, what was being aspired for, and the fact that there was a really strong generation of, I'd say, cultural phenomena in Sweden at the time, not only on the design scene when it comes to music, restaurants, media in general, and so forth. So that whole generation with the, I'd say, drive to share what was going on, what they had on their minds internationally, really moved things fast. And so he said, let's look into it, Stefan. And I was assigned to get that project going and start framing what we ought to be doing. And that's how it happened.
What was that first 2-3 years like? Did you pitch out some pilot projects? Did you say we're going to do 6 projects and expect 3 to fail?
Speaking about IKEA or?
The work at IKEA.
It was, I would say that a strong inspiration at the time was Capellini in Italy. Giulio Capellini had a way of opening the door to young designers in general. And he did an amazing project named Progetto Oggetto, where those that at the time were my friends on an international scale. So it was being inspired by how he brought designers with him. So I did a similar kind of concept in that sense, bringing these 15 to 17 Swedish designers together with different projects to where we pointed out, we gave briefs to different designers. It was not like you do whatever you want. Everyone had a very direct kind of assignment to do, whether it be a sofa or an armchair or something to complete the context of a home pretty much. So I think that when it comes to what we were doing or how it should be conceptually embraced, that was potentially had that in the back of my mind when I went to meet with Lennart at IKEA.
You've got these first few projects coming through, and the world's changing quite quickly. What was the landscape like at the company during this time and the changes and challenges that you had?
Speaking about IKEA again, right?
Yeah.
No, I'd say that again. I think that I don't think they believed they had a challenge. I think they were just moving on in a whatever direction that was at the time. Mm-hmm. It was not very strategic. I think that Lennart Ekmark, again, the punk rocker who was able to open the door, he wanted change. He was a change maker, and he found something to actually that made sense that he could support and hold on to. Again, I think that the consequences of what we did with IKEA PS and the tremendous traction we had and impact in terms of when it was launched back then and so forth, really promoted other things that was not accounted for when it comes to the process. Because what really, it showed that IKEA could, and everyone at IKEA was extremely hesitant before this happened. Because again, just looking back a bit, we brought in all of these designers from the outside, and IKEA always had, an internal design department. Mm-hmm. And of course, it was super challenging with a bunch of new kids from Stockholm, the capital of Sweden, getting most of them at least getting in there, and that disturbed the whole thing. And then when the idea was to launch it in Milan, which is again the mecca of furniture design. And IKEA never really connected to that thing. They always perceived themselves as something very different. They were not fancy or luxury or whatever it might be. Fine. But I'd say me and Lennart, we managed to push this project through and also establishing some kind of confidence within IKEA that, okay, if we want to make real change, if we're aspiring for a real dent in whatever we're doing, maybe we should be going to where it all happens. So it was a lot of questioning, and it was not easy in that sense. We spent a lot of time convincing decision makers internally. But the beauty is that and this was not the planned for kind of consequence. I think that what we did with IKEA, not only stirring in the pot of the furniture industry at large, and not only accelerating the interest for Swedish contemporary design and a stepstone for Swedish designers moving out in the world, working for other companies, wherever it was the confidence internally at IKEA with the designers realizing that we can actually expand far beyond what we believed was that used to be a restriction in terms of what can or cannot be done. Mm-hmm. And I'd also say that it sparked a plug to the kind of confidence and independence of IKEA being able to take new steps and initiate stuff transforming the culture within IKEA. And again, this was not deliberate. This has come as a consequence of those initiatives. Again, that is potentially what that whole project and everyone involved in that project should be the most proud about. That IKEA got some kind of an extended ability into the future with new cards to play or strings to stroke.
And when it comes to winning over some of those stakeholders, did you have any strategies or like key phrases that like help push them across the line?
Yes, I think that the major argument at all times was the fact that we were pointing at, again, history, how things were changing, why things were changing, and how that affected the market in terms of relevancy or, again, what was being asked for or aspired for in the market. And I think that getting back to that at all times, showing that this is a huge opportunity in time. People at this point not only salute the idea of simplicity, of durability, of longevity, but it was also due to the financial situation, very much a situation where people were promoting value for money, not necessarily cheap, but something that did make sense in terms of the financial general worry in the market. So in that sense, I'd say that it was the perfect window open for a few years for IKEA to actually take that position, and from there continue developing the way they've been doing it. And again, as you say, when you look at IKEA these days, you wouldn't consider them being a copycat. No, they're not anymore, because a lot of things interact, but this is it's truly one of those components that made them change and increase their independence, I would say.
It was like a keystone moment for them.
Yeah, and I don't think that anyone realized that at that time. And then again, it was the media success was amazing. It was great for IKEA, it was great for Sweden, it was great for the young designers and so forth. So everything that we aspired for in terms of short-term tactical impact, that kicked in.
Would you be happy to say that you're a Swedish cultural hero?
No, I think that I'd say that that has been forgotten since long. There's no that discussion is not on the table anymore, or maybe it was for a few years, but this is now history.
We want to talk to the people that make history. So thank you for being here.
Yeah,
thank you.
And so you took that drive and that window of opportunity, and POC and later Cake came along, and it said that industrial design was a key to success for those. What were some of the early days like?
What happened before I started POC was that I started a consultancy business that I grew as with IKEA, as I felt like before IKEA and with my own adventures, I had my own businesses in retail when it comes to furniture design. Same thing when it comes to importing and distributing and all that. I did the shows and so forth. But with IKEA, and I was always restricted because I didn't have enough resources. With IKEA, I realized that with someone, a customer who has the resources, being able to amplify whatever initiative you've got, you can do tremendous things. So I started a consultancy business named Ytterborn and Fuentes with a graphic design friend of mine. And we were pretty much doing design management and communication, product development and communication for a number of different companies. So what I did do in that sense was that I came to work a lot together with a number of Scandinavian tableware companies like Itala and Arabia and Hackman and Rörstrand, all about ceramics, glassware, pots and pans, and whatever it might be. And I did that for a number of years, and that was very successful. And I was fortunate to continue this journey working with external designers. So we worked with anything from big architects like Renzo Piano and back again to the friends from the early days in Milan with Konstantin Gricic and Mark Newson and all of those. So I did that for a number of years. But again, getting back to my perspective on and common denominator in terms of bringing purpose, I always had a purposeful kind of idea about what products we ought to be developing for our clients. And I'm still in that same lane or vertical, which is, even though we're doing plates or wine glasses or cutlery or whatever it was at the time for these clients, it was always about trying to decipher the sign of the times to be able to come up with something that did reflect the sign of the time better than anything else. And the reason why I was driving that idea from day one, and that's been with me at all times, is that anything that does reflect its time better than something else in terms of ambition and purpose and material and the way it's been made or the specific functionality reflecting its time. Those are the things that do become classics. And those classics, that is what's later being sold at auction houses and stuff which is being passed on from generation to generation. And this is really what got me going. And so in that sense, it was always about trying to bring and brief designers and work together with designers to make that fly. And I just talked to one of the former senior managers from these companies a couple of months ago, and he told me, like, with Itala and Rustran and Hackman and so forth, still their best sellers 20 years later are all the same products that we actually brought to reality back then. So I think that to some extent we did succeed with that in a good way. But what did happen then, getting back to POC, what happened later was getting back to POC, was that I felt a bit restricted when it comes to the purpose of actually, or to the ambition of serving with purpose. And POC came along as a great substitute to do that, because myself, I'd been a ski racer when I was a kid, and my older sons got into ski racing 5 or 6 years old, and I got into that same zone again and started to observe things. And one of those things was basically the worry being apparent with kids training at high speeds with lousy protection. That was one thing. But then there were a number of things aside from that were kicking in simultaneously. The carving ski had made its entry, and therefore people would, or the average speed increased by 30%, and suddenly people could actually start turning and carving, and that was a new kind of, people did not slide anymore vertically down the slope. It was, people did crash to larger, it was much more common with people crashing. Mm-hmm. We had the X game culture with kids doing crazy things, using protection gear just to survive if they ended up crashing. Mm-hmm. So there were a number of things that pointed towards the fact that even though people are not using helmets today, and this is early 2000, when I was out fundraising for the first time, or the first couple of years, I was trying to convince investors that everyone's going to wear a helmet in 10 years from now. And I realized that, and the mission of POC still is to do the best we could to possibly save lives and to reduce consequence of accidents by serving the market with better and more accurate protection. So in that sense, it was the level of purpose and doing good was far more tangible, not at least when it comes to how to communicate that. So that was a natural next step when I left my ambitions of establishing classics for our clients at Ytterborn and Fuentes. Sorry for the long monologue, but anyhow.
That's good.
Did you have a brief that came in that was snow gear, or you were a lifelong skier, or what happened where you were just like, this is something that we need to work on today?
Again, as I started saying, I've always been able to promote my visions and my values and my passion into a business concept. So at all times when I feel like this is something that I need to do, I can't hold back, it really gets me going. Mm-hmm. There's a company around the corner which is being started. So it's a brilliant tool for, I'm not sharing advice here, but to me, starting companies has been the toolbox for structuring and framing what I operationally should be doing on a daily basis. Hej, det här är Stefan Ytterborn och ni lyssnar på Redacted.
Hey everyone, this episode sponsored by PCBWay, the go-to destination for printed circuit board prototyping, low-volume production, and PCB assembly. If your team is working on electronics and you're in need of a prototype PCB, I can't recommend PCBWay enough. You can get a quote instantly, even if your circuit board schematics aren't finished yet. They can also help you with injection molded, 3D printed, sheet metal, and vacuum cast prototypes. PCBWay is the circuit board prototyper of choice for companies like Samsung, Siemens, Honeywell, Tesla, and Apple. But you don't have to be a big company to use their services. I've personally used their services to instantly get quotes and have had prototype PCBs delivered in a timely manner. On top of all of that, PCBWay is offering us a special discount just for our listeners. When you get a quote from PCBWay, be sure to use our promo code redacted for a special discount on us. You can find PCBWay in our episode description or go to pcbway.com.
Hej, det här är Stefan Ytterborn och ni lyssnar på Redacted.
You talked about briefly the products that reflect a sign of the times are what becomes a classic.
Yeah.
And you have a hand in a lot of classics.
Yeah.
Would you say there was like a formula that you used that you stuck to create classics?
Yes, I think that the formula is pretty much getting back to my journey when I went through these different architectural styles and realizing what did represent the times and what became permanent in that sense. And that is something that I can always, and of course I've been chiseling that for years and years, and I've probably increased my level of understanding this. Again, gut feeling, intuition, what's that? It's based on experience. And I think that avoid everything which is trendy and short-lived, and try to understand what is the extended opportunity of something. And again, I spend too much time on these things. At times I blush and feel a bit embarrassed but it's also my passion. I spend a lot of time thinking about these things. Will this actually happen? Is this a material that actually has a future? What are the environmentally related issues? Choosing this or that. Is there a new machine anywhere that could actually make this happen or whatever it might be? I think that all of these things create, and there's so many facets on this palette that actually and eventually pop up, seeing that this is what we need to do, and that becomes evident. And I honestly admit that there are a number of things that I'm really bad at, and I've spent my life doing and developing skills thanks to my level of passion for whatever topic that has been. So I'm pretty narrow in that sense, but that I've come to understand more and more.
Yeah, it's based around a lot of the designs historically and old classic designs that have been successful, that formula to do new classic designs.
But I think the interesting thing, without being too pretentious here, I think that a number of times, I don't think that the ambition, looking at the design classics of the world, I don't think that the ambition has been to, the majority of those are just, they happen to become classics.
Yes.
And because due to a number of different reasons, they just happen to be great timepieces. In that sense, the way I've been working my way forward has been, again, trying to understand the whys and what's behind that. And I think that without anyone can do this, but it's a bit of a disease again. I spend too much time thinking about these things, and they just co-interact somehow. And I was also in the era of data, and to support whatever decision you're making, I'd say, I just got the question the other day, how much data are you using in your daily work to make sure that you're on the right track and whatever it might be? And I don't retrieve a lot of data from wherever I may, but I think that I'm extremely data-driven, because the level of passion that is being associated to whatever I'm doing, I'm like a sponge in that sense, making sure that anything that relates or interacts to whatever I'm doing, I'm consuming that information through different media, whether it's here, there, or through people or socially or whatever it might be. So I think that I happen to be extremely data-driven, but it's not, I don't have
And because I know there are companies that do work with analysts and that they use number-driven stuff. And one of the criticisms we brought up was, that was brought up by a previous guest, Bo Euler, was they were using AI to generate designs and then using that to benchmark against the designs they design in-house. And anything that was too similar to the AI was discarded, because they said if it can be come up with a computer, if the analyst has come up with that, it's been done before, it's too generic. It won't be the next big thing. It'll be yesterday's big thing.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. And I think that AI, which is what everyone is talking about these days, necessarily, potentially, for strong reasons. But again, that's a reference bank of old information. So if you need to make new, I think there is an asset being a human being.
Yeah, definitely, to get those novel design solutions. So what was the origin story of Cake?
So basically with POC, and I exhibited every year at the Munich trade show, ISPO in Munich, which is the big sports show internationally. And I ran into an electric motorcycle for the first time, maybe in this is later, sorry. It's in 2013, I think. And I'm not a motorcycling geek. I'm actually a motorcycling hater. So I put my finger up in the air when there's a noisy Italian machine passing by in the street. It annoys me and I feel, go somewhere else. You're disturbing. Anyhow, so I never dreamed about making a motorcycle. But what happened was that I ran into an electric off-road motorcycle at the time, early stage. And I was struck by the idea of being able to getting out in the outback, exploring without disturbing and without polluting. I got one bike, and eventually I had more than 10 bikes at my country house from different, suppliers, early stage, with no intention of starting a business. But the more I rode these bikes and the more I had people riding these bikes with more experience than I had, the more interested I became in trying to figure out, hey, how do you make the perfect two-wheeler with an electric drivetrain? So that's how I got into it. And I can tell you, there were a number of things that really changed my perspectives on this. You had the experienced riders getting out there, and they would go back saying that, hey, Stefan, it's amazing. It's like skiing powder in the woods without the need for snow or slope. And I'd say that a game changer in terms of perspective was when I had young women for the first time riding these bikes. There's no changing gear or clutching, so they're easy to ride. If you ride a bicycle, you can ride one of these. Mm-hmm. And you can actually control the level of speed and acceleration that you're using. Young women for the first time trying these bikes, putting helmets on and the gear and so forth, and idling away really slowly. But then getting back to me after 20 minutes at high speed, sliding in front of me with the biggest smile on their faces, saying that, hey, Stefan, this is the most amazing thing I've done in my life. That's when I started to realize that this is going to open up the whole market. The traditional kind of macho, roary, aggressive, noisy, tinkery, whatever, is going to be replaced by something which is easy to ride. It's including, you don't need maintenance and so forth. So that's where I started thinking about what is the topology or category that ought to be brought forward. And together with that, the whole discussion, or let's say micromobility discussion, in terms of what's the future of transportation, what's the future of infrastructure and all that came along. And I realized that even though I started on the off-road side of things that I may speak to as we speak here, because there's a strong reason to that, the lion part of the market would become urban transportation. That's how if you look at Cake, what it was, now it's been acquired by someone else, but it was all about off-road and utility in combinations. That's how I got going. And I got to that point that I was referring to before, where I couldn't stop myself. The planets were in line, everything, I just had to do it. So that's how Cake got going.
For us as designers, we know Cake, it was almost inaccessible down here in Australia. We know it for its fantastic industrial design and great branding.
Yeah.
Would you say that was key to the success at Cake? Or was it just a consequence of having a great problem to solve?
I'd say that, again, personally, I never speak about design in the context of how things look. Mm-hmm. Design to me is a way for a group of people to achieve a common goal or a target. You need to include anything from industrial designers to engineers, whether they be electric or mechanical engineers. You need to have a wide perspective of things and competences integrating based on what is to be achieved. And I would say that the proof is in the pudding. Unless we had something that did perform well on the inside, we would never, ever have succeeded. And then, not speaking about design when it comes to, we wanted to bring a new typology to the table. And I think that we were able to do that in a way which is, you get same thing with POC actually, because again, looking at the sports business, everyone is looking at what Adidas or Nike does. And then they're all variants of that perspective. And looking at the motorcycling industry, everyone is looking at what their competitors are doing. I think that for us coming in new without the burdening kind of heritage being a part of the culture, our inspiration is contemporary architecture or contemporary art when it comes to form or texture and ways of doing things or combining stuff. So I think that we were not restricted by what the motorcycling culture how they would approach whatever we're doing. So in our case, it was all about building the conclusion was that, and this is how we brought it forward. And I think that's the reason for success. What was happening in the market was, before we got in, there were two types of players. Either there were guys that were technically oriented. Mm-hmm. They were welding stuff in their garages using a combination of motorcycling parts and downhill mountain bike parts. where the motorcycling parts became too heavy and the downhill mountain bike parts were too fragile. So actually they broke down after 15 minutes in the woods. And on the motorcycling side of things, when using a motorcycling chassis, they needed to put on tons of battery cells. So those vessels became super heavy. And our take on that is that everything needs to be engineered and developed from scratch. Because if we can reduce the number of battery cells by producing a super light bike that still would be durable enough to serve jumping 30 meters or doing a double flip, that would certainly bring that is the combination of technology and making and manufacturing and drivetrain aspects and supporting the performance we're looking to achieve, that would be the evidence solution. So that said, that's how we took on the project and we started developing. So again, looking at the bikes, there's nothing standard pretty much. I think that the only standard parts on the first Calc, for instance, was rubber handles, foot pegs, the rear suspension. Everything else, whether it be hubs, rims, tires, suspension, beyond that, brakes, everything was specifically engineered and designed to support the new category. And we brought something that ended up being 150 pounds, so pretty much sub 70 kilos to the market, that performed similar to a 125cc combustion engine off-road motorbike. And I think that's how we could succeed. So there are no shortcuts, there are no compromises, or you need to be true to your commitment of bringing whatever product it is to the market. And I would say that the drivetrain aspect of things, or how things, design and engineering, became extremely important, of course. And as everything came together, one would say that, hey, this is a great design just by looking at it. And we did receive a lot of attention. I think that we had more than 200 design and innovation awards throughout the years. But again, it needs to be complete product. No cheating. Be true to whatever promise you're embedding in whatever you're doing. And that gives the opportunity for someone or something or to get to the point where you get the attention that you maybe deserve or not.
How did you go about building a team that takes that sort of like very hands-on, we're going to build our own heritage approach to problems, as opposed to a lot of people try to build teams with historic experience, and then you end up bringing historic problems as well as historic ways of doing things?
Yeah. I think that I'm not a trained designer. I define myself as a choreographer. So in that sense, I write the scripts and I conduct and make sure that things are being played or are being tuned and refined in whatever way. And I think that in this sense, it's about communication. I think that this also is something that gets more and more complicated the larger you get, because in the beginning, when you're 3, 5, and 10, and 20, and 30 guys, it's easy and everyone kind of shares it or understands the perspective. Then when you grow beyond that, the reason why you're in business, what you're doing, and why you're doing what you're doing and so forth, you then start hiring people for HR reasons or for administrational reasons or for sales people that should be. And you do that at high pace. You start dissolving or diluting that core thing. And that's why I love the first 5 years of any company, because it's such an intense and team-oriented, shared perspective kind of culture where people do run and support each other in the same direction. So again, maybe I don't deliberately not hire people who would come from a certain industry. We've had people that do understand these businesses and industries, of course, without people that there are people from the motorcycling industry as well within the company, and they were needed. But again, they needed to be open to whatever new that we brought to the table. And I would say, I don't know if we spoke about this briefly before as we had the pre-sound check, but anyhow, there's this interesting perspective that really scared me in the beginning of my career, which is when you do bring something new to the market with a new typology. Same thing with POC, same thing in my previous life with being a consultant working for these different companies, and not at least with Cake. You disturb a lot of people. You disturb people that they're actually hating what you're doing. And I've come to the conclusion that unless you have 50% haters when you launch something, you're not going to be successful, because all of those haters actually represent the wanting perspective of stick to the old, let everything be what it always has been. And they're definitely the opposite to the customer that we're addressing. But unless that mass is big enough, which is, again, should be more than 50% haters that scream about what you're doing in social media, whatever it might be, you're not certain to become successful. So in that sense, embrace haters and make them be hated, because it's a great opportunity to actually achieve whatever your target would be associated to a company or a product or whatever it might be.
So if you're not controversial, at least a little bit, you'll be forgotten.
Yes.
You're listening to Redacted. To stay up to date with the show and see what else we've got going on, be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at redacted_design_pod. Subscribe to the podcast and tell your friends. Cheers.
So what was your biggest challenge as you matured, Cake?
I think that the biggest challenge happened maybe 20 months ago, because everything was moving according to plan. But suddenly the financial markets again went into a stagnation or became numb. And we were not really prepared for what was going to happen. We were meant to close a late stage C funding in August in 2022. And the ones that we anticipated to come along, they were interested, but they didn't push the button. And time went by, and we realized that we're potentially not going to find the investors as we had beforehand in Northern Europe. We needed to address Mid and Southern Europe and look at what was going on in North America. And we spent time there for a long time with success again, the way we have. And again, I've been close to not being able to close fundraisers for 20 times throughout my career, but you always got to the point of finding a solution. So I was used to the kind of climate I was in. And North America at the time, this is like winter 2022, early 2023. We spent a lot of time in Canada, and not at least in Montreal, with Quebec State that had deliberately, there's this idea of positioning Quebec as the greenest region in the world. And they got hydropower, they've got the metals and the chemicals and whatnot. They truly have an opportunity. And this is something that has gathered business, industry, politicians, and so forth. So everyone's moving in that direction. And we had a super strong diet there for a while. And that went on until the Silicon Valley Bank went down on the 10th of March, because then suddenly there was no interest in doing any investments. And I'd say that this happens in conjunction with a few disturbing things in parallel. So I'd say that the general interest in sustainability from the environmental point of view has fallen back and taken a stop at this point for a number of different reasons. I think that humankind has and I'm not pointing at anyone, we have all of these big crises around the world, whether it be Israel or Ukraine or Taiwan or whatnot. So I think that in that sense, suddenly anything related to sustainability took a pause. Micromobility that had been super hyped was suddenly also pausing. Our take on that sense was that there's no chance that we're going to find venture capital investments in the market the way it had turned out to be. So we started approaching the automotive industry with the perspective of, in general, what's going on with regulations and stuff. Cars are being banned for cities, not at least in Europe to a large extent. And in that sense, all of these car manufacturing companies and brands are in need for additional vehicles within their portfolio. So we started during fall to approach the car companies of the world. But they also have an issue with electric car sales going down, but generally with inflation and the financial climate being what it is and so forth. They were not that hungry. And again, I never ever thought that this was going to kill us. But eventually, when we were meant to close our last, as long as I was on board, our bridge round by the end of January, one of our main investors, anchor investors, suddenly just left us. It was a terrible surprise, of course, but I'd say that it's been a challenge that time-wise has been going on for very long, where we've been able to deal with that in different ways, and that also opened up. We'll see how the company now has been taken care of and what's happening or what's not happening, but. Again, we did open a number of doors to Asia thanks to the fact that we were restricted in terms of doing business the way we had planned for, where our focus had been Europe and North America initially before going to Asia. But due to great interest in the brand for, again, a great product, we suddenly had all of these high-quality companies in Asia wanting to do business with us. So we opened that door due to the fact that we had to find new markets, new revenues, new opportunities. And we came along with an amazing deal in China, for instance. So again, life is what it is. Business life is what it is. You win some, you lose some. And again, am I surprised? I'm surprised that we actually had to file for bankruptcy. Everyone was asking, how could this happen? And my question a few months after is, how could anyone let this happen? Because with the position we had on an international basis, with all of the contracts that we had signed, ending up in a vacuum that occurred now, building the same kind of position with whatever associated products is going to take another 10 years, and it's going to be twice the money that has been invested at this point. So again, running businesses is about problem solving. And most of the times, I think that entrepreneurs and business leaders are good at solving these problems. And it's a part, that's what you get to the office in the morning. It's going to be problem solving. There's no surfing in that sense. And with that, it's the nature of the beast. And at this point, for the first time, I did not lock in that last financing that I've been spoiled being able to succeed with as of before.
And would you say there are any lessons learned from that? Anything you could have done to insulate the business a bit more?
Yeah, I'd say that a very important lesson that come the technical investment reality by the end, as we had the issues of closing the rounds or the final round, that was due to a number of things. The market went down in general, but evaluations also went down. So we were a bit cocky about what we had been used to, doubling or tripling valuation post-money before you close the fundraise. And if we had been a bit more, I'd say, humble about lowering our expectations back in August in 22, we would potentially have had better chances at an early stage of actually closing that intended seed funding. But what happens is also that when the market is going the way it does, you don't think too much about what a disastrous climate may bring. The VC ecosystem has been implementing the idea of preference shares, which means that whatever happens when it comes to a business, they have their preference shares, which are prioritized in terms of who gets money first and so forth, with whether the company is being sold or if it's other associated financial deals being done. And that was something where I would never, ever on any journey promote anything by common shares, all for one, so that everyone's equal at all times. Because when you have those preference shares and they're before anyone else who comes later in an investment process, that increases risk, minimizes upside. The next thing is that we started with these generous people on the cap table bringing convertible loans just to move forward until we could close the fundraise. And that's the next thing that really hurt us at the end, because all of those convertible loans, they're also being prioritized in terms of who gets money first when, again, paying back loans and getting new cash into the business and so forth.
For the people listening in, could you just briefly explain what a convertible loan is?
Yeah, so sorry about that. A convertible loan is someone lending money to the company, and that is then being transitioned into equity as you close a financial round. Raising has been implemented. Whatever money that gets in starts, some of that will be paid back to the ones that either were given away the loan or actually turned into equity. So in that sense, we got to a point by the end where we had limited ourselves and the appetite for investing, because we had all these preference shareholders together with the convertible loan givers, and they were all being prioritized. Again, it didn't matter how amazing a product, in this case our product, and a brand like Cake, its attraction is one thing, but the financial sobriety behind that investment became very unattractive. So I'd say that if I'd known about this before, and also when, again, I was starting by saying that when evaluation goes down in combination with all of this, it becomes a nightmare. I think that we ended up in a very unpleasant situation and building one solution on top of the other that all made us ending up stuck in a corner at the end. I think that I've learned a lot from that.
So it's more of a financial problem as opposed to a design one or a product issue.
Yeah, 100%. And again, looking at the past 10 years when it comes to growing companies fast, with the venture capital market being what it is and so forth, I think that in 10 years from now, we're going to look back and laugh at it, how things were just accelerated, pushed forward in a way that from a number of perspectives did not bring meaning or was not favorable for a number of reasons.
Is that because they're not sustainable?
Yeah, I think it's a very unsustainable. It grows some successful companies, but it also loses a number of super talented companies due to the fact that if it's not successful according to this and that, there's no patience from the investor side of things. They let the people or the companies go. So in that sense, it is tragic. But again, I've been part of this ecosystem, so. I'm just, at times, I'd be complaining about the fact that the VC companies or the guys on our board of directors did not understand that we can't make a shortcut here. There's no cheating here, because if we are to achieve this, it's going to take more time. And a lot of these VC companies come from the software side of things. They're used to growing the companies by 3 or 5x. But if you're making something physical, tangible in this sense, that needs its service and functionality and process in terms of making and manufacturing and whatnot and testing and so forth, there are, you cannot accelerate that reality beyond what can be done practically. So in that sense, I've been in this where I was compromising with, yes, we can do that, we can grow that fast and so forth. And even though I knew it was going to be nearly impossible, I played that game and said, yes, let's do it. And I guess that if I hadn't, we probably would not have had the funding that we needed. It's like sleeping with the devil a bit.
And how do you convince the devil that he shouldn't be going super fast? He needs to think about building a future heritage brand.
Yeah, I think that I've spent too much energy on that same topic just to be able to rhetorically, with anything from being rational and honest and to confrontational and when needed. But far too much time have been spent on dealing with those challenges and issues that could have been invested in spending more time for the business itself.
Yeah, for the fun stuff and the development and the growth.
Yeah, fun and important stuff for operations.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I really feel for you and that experience, but it's good to hear that you've learned a lot from that. And now moving into the future, you've set up a new design agency, 2B.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
It's not really far-fetched. It's doing what we were doing at Cake or what we did at POC or what I did before. So again, it's all about product design and communication, bringing stuff, again, I'd say making sure to chisel business plans and to understand what the business plan means in product offering. And in the best of cases, being able to run and direct these processes, in the best of cases, bringing that together with our clients to the market. So again, as we had to file and people were aware about it, I think that we've had 50 inquiries from around the world, from different industries and so forth, whether we'd be able to support, help, collaborate, or whatever it might be. So again, it was a truly natural kind of extension to the situation that we were in. So I took with me the three industrial designers, and they're very, I'd say, broad spectrumed. The spectrum is wide. They use the 2 and 3 dimensional designers. They're excellent in photography. They're David Gonzalez, who's one of the guys who's been working with me already at POC and has been on the journey with Cake pretty much from the beginning. And Oscar, who is an amazing CAD guy, joined the Cake journey 5 or 6 years ago. And Fanny was the most recent one. She's a young designer that practically fell in love with in terms of what she does as an industrial designer. And she actually went to Umeå, the university for vehicle design, and did something that we never got to complete. But her master thesis was the KIB, which is a four-wheeler, a kind of a
electric quad bike.
Yeah, electric quad bike for addressing the regenerative farming market, and it's an amazing project. So us four, and we're looking to grow this business and adding on competences to be able to serve the market and our customers with whatever is needed. It's a new journey with back to the Ytterborn and Fuentes times of things.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Would you say that like your business now is like selling that choreography that you did before?
Yeah, so I'm so instead of being a choreographer only for POC and only for Cake, we have the ability of working with. And again, I think that we need to be careful not to end up with too many clients, because again, if you are to do this for real, you need to go deep, and going deep in that sense means time. and time is limited. So in that sense, we need to be careful about not jumping in too many boats and make sure that we have the ability of serving those that would serve us in terms of shared perspectives, values, ambitions, and so forth at the best.
Yeah, it's a really good segue. We have a question that we often talk to people where we ask you about chaff work. So like in design businesses, we have what we've coined chaff work, which is stuff that pays the bills, but it's not high value. And the go-to is often point of sale work, is often very fun in design where you do a point of sale display and then you get more point of sale display and it takes up a lot of time, but it's not paid very well.
Yeah.
And it ends up like sucking up a lot of the bandwidth of the business.
Yeah.
I know 2B is very early in its inception, but you clearly had a lot of time with this with Fuentes. Like, how do you navigate this idea of selecting only certain clients and making sure your time is limited to those that are important to you?
I think that at this point, I don't have a structure or a system for it. I think that we have discussions internally between us at this early stage in terms of how do we deal with something that doesn't pay the bills, but that we fall in love with. And the more complicated projects, the larger ones that always seem to be more frustrating because there's so many layers of people and decision makers at those different entities that needs to be convinced and dealt with and so forth. And the level of understanding within larger organizations is very often not at the level it ought to be. So you end up in a kind of I'd say, fluffy or complicated situation. I think that where there's no mutual bonding or understanding.
Yeah.
And I would, again, getting back to intuition and gut feeling, I think that it's going to be harder when we're eventually 35 at some point. But at this point, it's very much about sitting down and you, after 20 minutes chat, you will know whether this is something that will become mutually favorable in terms of what we can bring to the table. And every time, and life is potentially much simpler than what you think, or simpler and similar in this sense, because that gut feeling, every time when I had a feeling where it says, don't do it, and despite that, you end up whatever activity it ends up being, I'm always 100%. I should have gone there, and I knew from the beginning that this was not going to pop.
Yeah.
And so again, you need to use your emotions and feeling for things, and that helps you deal with it. Not saying that's without associated problems, because if you fall in love with too many of these companies, suddenly there's a bigger shark out there, which is also something that you could love, but you don't have you're stuck with whatever you've brought on. You will end up in a problem. So yeah. I've been very blurry here. Sorry about that.
That's good. Would you summarize just make sure it's a romantic connection before you say yes to the client?
Yeah, that's romantic connection. And that goes for everything, I'd say, in terms of who you're hiring, who your clients are, who your customers would be in the end, that you're meant to establish a relation together with. So again, and I think that there's something that we did not speak too much about is relations in terms of communication or industrial design or whatever it might be. And I think that there has to be a combination between brain and hearts. And I think that this has come a bit further because I think that vanity is an important driver. Vanity is an ugly, I hate the word. I hate realizing that I'm a vain person too. And some people exclude themselves for admitting that they're vain. I was in a discussion with a senior big business dude in America recently, and it was like, oh, that doesn't go for me and so forth. And I asked him, do you play golf? And he's like, I love playing golf. So, okay. And we got to the point, what clubs are you using? And what's your handicap? And then he started telling me whatever clubs he was using, and he was potentially handicap 15 or something. So not a super talented guy. And I asked him, why are you using these clubs? They're developed for pros and you're unable to use them for whatever reasons. And he came to admit the fact that I am vain. And in that sense, I think that vanity has gone from a situation 20 years ago where vanity was all about looking good. But I think that vanity there's a new layer here because you need to support your, I'd say, social positioning by intellectual choices and discussions or positioning. So whenever you're having dinner with your neighbors during a Saturday night, aside from supporting your choices in life, they could have an aesthetic kind of reason to why you support it. There's also, and most oftenly these days, a rational argument to why you're aspiring for something. So that combination, I think, something looking smart while being smart is a combination that needs to be dealt with. So heart and brains at all times, due to the social dilemma of people needing to position themselves and being perceived smart by their social community, is a super important component to make people attracted to a product or a service or whatever it might be.
Vanity and confidence are just two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
There's a lot of examples of that now as well. It's a weird thing, though, because it's about a lot of it's behind branding and things like that, that people hold value in the brands as status.
I think that we've been bad at learning from experience here. Back in the days, I was lecturing a lot, and I would most often just in any audience just shout out or throw a question. So is anybody willing to share a really old brand as an example? And they would all go like Coca-Cola and Kellogg's and whatnot. And I was point taken. And I think that there's so much we can learn that has been around since humans started to interact and communicate. And I think one of the great examples are religions. And all religions are based on a philosophy. There's a story behind everything that is being told by associated opinion makers, whether they be imams or priests or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. Everything is constituted architecturally through minarets or churches or whatever it might be. They have a graphic language, which is they would win any design contest everywhere with crosses and yin and yangs and moons or whatever. And there's this context where everything points or reflects the story which is being told. And they've been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And I think that also demystifies the idea behind the brand, but also the necessity of having a strong reason why you exist. Mm-hmm. And making sure that same story is being told throughout all your different media opportunities. And that's why look at what religion is and understand it, which everyone does and understands. And don't read these brick-thick management books on branding, because it's not going to get you any smarter. It's be honest to your promise. There's a story behind it and execute accordingly. That's how easy it is.
And would you say, like, when a brand loses its reason, that's how it dies?
Yeah.
Can you share a project where your choreography has had a significant impact on the user experience or the success of a design?
I feel frustrated when there hasn't been enough time for choreography. And this happens also at a big orchestra. If I'm a conductor, not a choreographer, let's use the orchestra as the conductor. Initially, when there's the four guys playing in the band, it's easy. And then you end up with a huge bunch of musicians. And if you don't have the time to actually walk through and train the piece that is written and conducting the and being able to speak to the group collectively and collectively also pointing at certain individuals playing different instruments in that collective forum to be able to understand why things need to change in a certain order and so forth. The tendency is that the outcome of that is less qualitative, I would say, and therefore I get back to those early 5 years when you're so aligned with your team colleagues. Everyone have their different roles. That doesn't mean that the guy who plays the timpani could interfere with the guy playing the violin, saying that, hey, if you do that note, I need to do this differently. And I think that discussion is extremely vital and important between the guys in the band or with the orchestra. That is an ongoing dynamic kind of discussion. Mm-hmm. That happens while you're training. But then you get to the point where training is, you don't have the ability of gathering the people that needs to be trained or the group that needs to be a part of the process. On a personal level, I'm in Quebec chasing money rather than being with the guys on the team, dealing with whatever it might be. So I think that my dream role in that sense, or for anyone aspiring for a similar kind of role, is that consistency is of highest importance. And when consistency is when it's not happening, it's things fade a bit.
How do you keep that consistency?
Yeah, no, I think that, again, maybe I should have, after 5 years with Cake, have left the position in being the CEO. And someone else catering for making sure that the more administrative stuff was taken care of by someone else, so I could continue spending my time with the band.
Making punk music.
Yes, or jazz, you know.
I mean, when it comes to jazz or punk rock, we usually compare that as old school or new school good design.
Yeah.
How do you convince others, and we did touch on this a little bit with IKEA, but how do you convince others that good design is a value add? And how has that strategy changed from the start of your career to now?
I think that, again, good design promotes sustainability, not only from the environmental point of view, that has a clear, anything that can survive aesthetically and physically for a longer time is the greatest contribution you can make to planet Earth and to people in general. It's economically and smart, and it supports what I believe is the biggest challenge, which is basically people buying too much crap too often that ends up being garbage and just thrown away. So that's one aspect. But there's also the sustainability in terms of revenues for companies or organizations as a whole, where you don't need to invest in new commitments or communication perspectives at all times. You don't need to invest in new product with the pace that you believe that you have to, investing in anything from development into tooling, into marketing of that same thing and so forth. So I'd say in that sense, good design in that sense is sustainable, and it does support whoever is behind the design as well as the user and the planet at large. That's the only way. So that's what people need to understand. There is no other way.
And what if they're just like, what about my bottom line, my profit margins? How does this help me increase my profit margins? So my
Our bottom line in that sense, it does support you because your spendings in marketing will be less. Your investments in capex for tooling and development and so forth are less and so forth. So you spend far less money if you're able to invest in something which is long term and has a long life cycle from day one. It might be it's a bit more painful day one because that process will be a bit more complicated than just shooting from the hip. But the payoff is much, much greater.
Mm-hmm. As long as you can sell it.
But it's almost like you got to dig a lot deeper to get that payoff.
That purpose.
Yeah. And again, you need to be, design happens everywhere. It's just more or less elaborated or deliberate. So even the stupidest thing has had a design reason or process behind it. But good design in that sense is also evolving from that the philosophical idea, the story or the religion that we were referring to. Yeah. So in that sense, you also need to be, I'd say, ambitious, making sure that, because unless your organization behind it stands behind it and where you can see the consistency with the message, the product and everything else within that brand, company or organization, it's not going to stick. So in that sense, of course, it's a much more complex initiative. One product wonders happen, but it's lottery. But being able to establish an organization that do establish a relation long-term with a specific user in mind and establishing that mutual love affair, that is what really supports the bottom line of things when it comes to the business side of it.
You need to get that consistency and that romance, that consistent romance.
Yes. And again, like any relation, you need to continue investing in those relations, because just ending up in a bar with someone and spending the night together gets you to a certain point. But if you decide that there's an ongoing interest, that relation needs to have an ongoing investing strategy behind it, because otherwise you'll split again.
And you'll slowly die and you'll lose your reason for the brand.
Yes.
I see.
I think we can all recognize ourselves in that sense just by being humans and interacting with other humans.
You're making me feel very existential at the moment.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I'm not sure if I'm a fan.
So have you done any double backflips on the bikes, the electric ones?
Myself?
Yeah.
No, I got to the point where I realized that if I'm going to do this, I need to learn how to ride motorbikes. So I spent a lot of time riding enduro combustion engine bikes, not to be a stupid one, but I truly enjoy it. It's one of the funniest things or most enjoyable things I do. And I've been mountain biking a lot in my life, still do. But this is being able to ride downhill at high speed without the need for a slope. So it's really entertaining, super exciting. Yeah. But you would never see me doing a single flip.
Fair enough, yeah.
Not in public anyway.
Yeah, by mistake, it could happen.
Miss that ledge.
And maybe pivoting a bit, because we do tend to focus a bit on culture. What would you say is a weakness of Scandinavian design culture, and what are its strengths?
I think that the weakness is our lack of. It's again, you need to be broad-minded in terms of what areas of design that you're looking to. But I'd say that we're missing out on the industrial perspective of the need for associated investments at certain levels and so forth. And I think that there are a lot of international Swedish companies, but also there's this polarized situation by being local or international. And I think that very often there's a strong local perspective on the do's and don'ts that holds design back in terms of not getting the adequate or relevant investments associated to what the ambition is, and therefore not coming out with a product which is solid enough. And that's one side of it. Other perspectives on Scandinavian design is that, or Swedish design, I would say, that there are only 10 million people in Sweden. When I meet people in New York, and I tell them that, hey guys, in terms of comparing, we're pretty much the same population as that are working on this island on a daily basis. So the level of impact is only related to the size of what can be done here. Mm-hmm. But that said, the collective experience in working internationally in business and design is limited. So I'd say that there's the level of experience is not or it is what it is, but it to some extent it also holds us back in terms of bringing relevant innovation to the table at the pace that can be done. So I think that we're farmers to one extent with the ambition of playing international football, but it's small and tiny and a bit held back while ambitions are high.
Would you say the size, though, could be turned into an advantage because you're close to Europe and because everything has to be export focused?
Yeah. That's maybe the next perspective of things. I think that there has been this in Sweden since we've always been the cousin from the countryside with the aspiration of playing the big leagues. And it's different to many of the other Scandinavian countries. So in Sweden, we imported the king from France since 300 years back. There's this want of being a part of the larger global stage. And that goes, we have the most foreign NHL players in ice hockey in America, except for the natives, Canada and the US. I think that we have the most startups per capita on an international scale from Sweden. There is a lot of music, for instance, coming from here. I think that we've established Sweden as one of the top food countries in terms of what's going on that scene and so forth. So I think that there is this drive of wanting to share whatever is where we've been held back in far north and not being part of the true scene. And that kind of frustration is also an accelerator when it comes to creativity and moving out from the... And I assume that there's similar kind of behaviors with Australia, for instance.
In Australia, it's similar in the geography and the size. I think the caveat with us is there's a big perception in a lot of industries that we can't compete internationally and we're not export focused. So that a lot of people go domestic and they say, oh, we just can't compete in America or Europe. Like it just wouldn't work. And that can be very frustrating to talk to people because I know it's wrong. And the reason I know it's wrong is so peak car production in Australia 1970, we used to produce over 500,000 cars a year. Yeah. The population back then was like half of what's...
I actually used to drive a Holden when I was in Sydney when I was 20 for a year.
But like those cars used to be sold in America as Pontiacs or Chrysler. Yeah. So it's I know that this idea that Australia can't export or be on the world stage is an invented prophecy that is not accurate, but because it's so perpetuated, it becomes self-fulfilling. Yeah. And we see that all the time. And this project has really just reinforced that viewpoint to me that it's a cultural problem as to why we're not bigger players internationally. It's not a resource issue.
There's a lot of ambition too, but it's whether, the values line up.
Like people get broken or they leave. Yeah. And that's generally what happens here.
And they'll go to Europe.
And they never come back.
But like that's very interesting about the most startups per capita for Sweden. Yeah.
This is a difficult question for most, but we try not to skip it. what would you say has been your biggest failure and what did you learn from it?
No, my biggest failure, I think that failure is one of the key triggers for development. So I fail on a daily basis, but of course, by far the biggest failure is not being able to close the most recent fundraise for Cake. A project, I spent 7 years with that project. We had things around the corner that were great. We were in a position that, that was amazing from a number of different angles. And again, I've been so busy with the aftermaths in terms of liquidating subsidiaries around the world and so forth. So that has kept me busy. But yes, that's by far the most painful failure. And again, I think that I'm going to start griefing here during a European summer, which is where things kind of release in terms of liquidation-oriented issues. I'm proud for a number of things we did. We were the mission of inspiring towards zero emission by combining excitement and responsibility. I think that we did open eyes on a number of people around the world, and I love what we've been doing in a number of different initiatives. Anti-poaching in Africa, starting something that we did not finalize, the first zero emission active motorbike, and whatnot. However, I think that I'm going to regret the not being able to bridge the way forward the way I had hoped for. So yes, long answer, but yes, Cake is my biggest failure.
But what did you learn from it?
And what I learned is basically that nothing is, don't take anything for granted. Make sure to be mentally prepared for surprises. And I think that I'm surviving in that sense. And then we were on to those practical things. There's certain things that I wouldn't do again. I wouldn't accept anyone investing in any entity that would start claiming preference shares, for instance, and so forth. There are a lot of technical stuff that I've learned through that I can utilize in whatever next journey there is.
Yeah, what you previously mentioned about the financials. Thank you for sharing such a down-to-earth experience with us. I know that sharing and chatting about this can be challenging, so it's been fantastic with the dialogue and the openness that we've been talking about this together.
Thank you.
Okay, looking ahead, what's the dream goal for the 2B design team, and what's your dream goal?
I think that it's really important that we do expose ourselves to opportunities that may have a very high level of impact in terms of doing good. Mm-hmm. So I think that anything from the young Dutch guy who came up with the idea of collecting plastics in the ocean, for instance, that's a wonderful project. We need to look at large scale, impactful, doing good jobs that can change, improve, and innovate. But there's also I think that sometimes the power of communication is being forgotten. I think that you can also do smaller things when it comes to the tangible side of things, what you're initiating, but also spreading the word and initiating opinion making and changing people's perspectives and behaviors. So I think that the power of communication is, together with impactful physical initiatives, are amazing. Together with, in combination with or separately, the power of communicating something that do stress people's minds and willingness to change, improve, and do different. And I think that all of those, and everything is global these days, so we need to make sure to get, because we're also in a hurry. There's so many things out there that needs to change now, not in 10 years, not in 25 years. So in that sense, we need to find ways and pathways with an impactful result for the same reasons.
And maybe scaling way backwards in time, like if you were starting out right now, what advice would you give to your younger self?
That would be, that said, I should potentially come up with something that I've learned from, but I think that let your passion drive your decision making and be humble about what you learn. Don't take anything for granted, and whatever happens, there are new doors opening that you may walk through, and don't let that be your guidance. Don't worry.
Yeah, that's profound. Some of that advice, you speak in a really existential way. It's wonderful. For the final question, what's a product whose design you really admire
Yeah, I would say that there's so many things, and I happen to get these questions, and I'm going to lean to something that really changed my mind, something that I was asked in a Faidon book to actually pick a product, and this is 20 years ago. But then at the time, Apple had done subwoofer together with Harman Kardon. It was that transparent thing that really looked like a mushroom somehow inverted. And it really changed the typology for how hi-fi audio stuff could eventually come to appear. And I think that they were early in that sense giving it that organic and also, I'd say, honest and transparent. Everything that the electric component stuff was all visible. So that's something that did. It's a mark in terms of how to be able to change typology. And I was referring to Johnny Ive in that book, saying that, Johnny, you did this great and so forth. Then I learned later on, and Johnny is amazing in whatever he does, but I learned that it's a guy who's now become my friend. It's Chris Stringer, who was the actual designer behind that subwoofer. And so I'm going to choose that one. And it didn't change the world, but I think it's a great example on how you're able to change typology, and that has the ripple effect of opening a new direction where tons of companies after that started opening up their own creativity to something which was not a box just because it was a loudspeaker. It had the opportunity of becoming something else.
All right, I think that's everything on our list. Thank you, Stefan, for joining us on the show today. For our listeners, don't forget to check the show notes for the links to anything that we've mentioned, where to follow the show, see more of Stefan's work, plus discounts from our sponsor, PCBWay. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, this has been Redacted.
The number you have dialed has not been recognized. Please check and try again. The number you have dialed has been...
Redact.